All right. Hello, Mrs. Warnock here. And in this virtual lecture, we're just going to be we've been talking about the structure of DNA, what DNA codes for. And I just wanted to take a little bit of a further look into DNA and, what's actually inside of the DNA that allows us to determine a particular trait. So DNA stands for deoxyribonucleic acid, okay? And just to kind of refresh you on that, which we've talked about already, that deoxy has to do with the ribose sugar. So the ribose in DNA, that that little pentagon sugar, is missing an oxygen. So deoxyribonucleic, it's found in the nucleus, acid. And DNA, so what is it? It's the genetic material that determines the inherited characteristics in all living things, okay? So every living thing, and even non-living things like viruses, all have either DNA or RNA. And that DNA or RNA, it codes for the proteins that make up that particular organism. And if you go back and refresh yourself on your DNA pairs, remember we have adenine, cytosine, guanine, and thymine. Adenine always binds with thymine. Cytosine always bonds with guanine. So I think in our last virtual lecture, we came up with a little helpful hint for how to remember how many hydrogen bonds are between each of those base pairs. And we said 2 angry tigers, because this has 2 hydrogen bonds. And we said 3 calm giraffes. And that's because C and G have 3 hydrogen bonds, okay? So let's take a look at this little diagram here. And what we're looking at is a picture of a cell, okay? And in the middle here, we have the nucleus. So the nucleus is only found in eukaryotic cells. We're going to talk later on in this unit about what a eukaryotic cell is, but humans have eukaryotic cells. And inside the nucleus, you're going to have your DNA stored in these little X-shaped structures, all right? So take a look at these little X shapes. So those guys have a name, and they're actually called chromosomes. So if you think back to our last set of notes, we talked about how we have 2 meters of DNA in every single cell. And if we were to unravel all the DNA in every single cell and, link it end to end and stretch it all out, it would go back and forth to and from the sun hundreds of times. Hundreds. It's a lot. So it's a lot of DNA inside of every one of these nuclei. So the chromosome is the strategy that cells have developed to store and organize all of that DNA. So basically, here you've got your DNA, which is made of all these base pairs, A, T, C, G, T, A, C, G, with that twisted ladder shape, So within that twisted ladder, if we follow it here, a gene is just one small segment of the DNA. So a single gene is what determines, for example, eye color. Okay. Other things that genes can code for would be fur color, fur length, height, and things like that. So a gene is just a short segment of the DNA that codes for a particular thing. That could be a visual thing like eye color, or it could even be a behavior like we talked about earlier about the waggle dance in the bee. That's actually coded for in the bee's genetic makeup. All right, and so all of those genes and all of that DNA are wound up around these little proteins, and those proteins are called histones. You don't need to know that, but just so that we're clear on it. So they're wound up around these little sphere things called histones, and packaged up into these structures here called chromosomes, okay? So the chromosomes contain all of your DNA and therefore all of your genes. So just to kind of sum up what this diagram is saying, DNA is made of segments called genes and is wound tightly into chromosomes and stored in the nucleus. Okay, so down here at the bottom, we've just got some fill in the blank, and it says every organism requires a set of instructions that specifies its traits. Those instructions are called DNA. And we've also referred to those instructions as like a cookbook or something like that. But they are, they're the instructions, the blueprints for the cell. They code for all the proteins inside the cell, and that stuff that holds all those instructions is called DNA. So hereditary and genetic information, also known as DNA, it contains small segments, these guys up here, called genes. And all those genes are wound tightly into chromosomes, and then they're located inside the nucleus of each eukaryotic cell. So it's important to understand DNA, genes, and chromosomes when we study heredity, which is right here. And heredity is just the passage of these instructions from one generation to another. So things like eye color, hair color, behaviors like the waggle, dance, and bees, those things are all hereditary. Or in other words, they can be passed down from parent to offspring in the genes. Okay, I hope that's helpful. And you guys can fill in all the stuff that we talked about in your Unwinding DNA notes.